Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Alana James. Today's topic is anxiety, imposter syndrome, and caretaking. And at the Regional Council of Graduate, Southern Council of Graduate Schools meeting that I just came back from attending, we had a panel of students, all of whom were presidents of their local student associations, graduate student associations. And they said the most important question that we should all be asking you as professors and people who work with you is just simply, how are you doing? So we ask, how are you doing? And we'll have a little conversation today about kind of the low-hanging fruit on these topics: anxiety, imposter syndrome, and caretaking of others. Just really lifting the lid and looking in a little to encourage you to know that it's common. If you face these issues, or you have friends who are facing these issues, to maybe give you some good next steps and encourage you to take good care of yourselves. So our reflective questions, and we like to ask them at the beginning and the end, is: what personal issues are you facing that may slow you down? Who are the people that care? And do they also care about your finishing your graduate degree? So sometimes there'll be people in your lives who care about one or the other. Ideally, you have people who care about both. And after the discussion of stopgap measures, will they help, and or do you need to seek further support? So this is our discussion, and then you need to decide what your next steps are. So our agenda is to talk about anxiety, then imposter syndrome, then either being ill or caretaking others, and then we'll have a conversation. Although please join in the chat at any time to tell us what you agree with or disagree with, and any resources you might want to share with the group. We'll make sure that those who are watching by recording get them as well. So we have a little conversation as I'm getting started in the room. And we see this after one of our big webinars. People come to us and say, where are the slides? The slides are in the big marker room under handouts. Also, should you ever want slides from a previous session, you can write Margie, M-A-R-G-I-E, at dralnet.com, and she'll be glad to send them to you. So let's get started about anxiety. So each one of these has its own overarching issue that sets it up as having a place in our lives where we feel like we lose control, and may lose control over our time. And the thing about anxiety is that it has a potential to escalate. So I have some friends who suffer or have suffered over time with this, and they would say that at the beginning it was sort of something you could moderate and almost came and went, but you could focus on other things and not notice it so much. And then over time, what triggers it seems to increase, and the level of stress, the level of tension, and the way that your mind fixates on what you're anxious about escalates. At that point, you can feel completely immobilized. And some level of anxiety appears to be increasingly pervasive in graduate schools. And the only reason I say appears to be is that we don't really have good data, do we, about how many people were suffering silently in earlier times. But people perhaps are not suffering as silently now, which is a good thing. So Adrian is pointing out that any conversation that we have about wellness is has 4 components of physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental, cognitive. We are whole beings, and we have many ways that these things can affect us. At its very base, I think anxiety is an emotional disorder. It makes us afraid, or it allows our fear to come to the surface. And I'm just going to say, I'll say it again later, the next session today, we have a piggyback. So after webinars on Mondays, we have groups on Mondays, and the groups are less talking from me and more talking from students about these topics. And we have a group discussion today on work-life balance that also Adrian will go across that particular format of all parts of ourselves. And there really is a curriculum. Some people call it, as Adrian is pointing out, another student called it our hidden curriculum. The graduate school puts us in touch with the parts of ourselves that are undeveloped. So that might be emotional, spiritual, as well as, you know, the things that we knew we were getting into when we went into school, the cognitive issues. Now, I'm going to, I'm quoting here, and I'm giving you the links from the quotes because I found some good resources that are, one that's an overarching level of advice, some from the medical world and another from a student who's faced these things. And they didn't say, they said some things that I would have said, and then they went into some depth that I thought was important. So the first thing about anxiety is that you should know the symptoms. You should know if you have it. If you're becoming more anxious, and including the following: feeling nervous, restless, or tense, having a sense of impending danger, panic, having a sense of doom, an increased heart rate physically, rapid breathing. By the time you get to sweating and trembling, you should take this very seriously. Feeling tired or weak, though, might be an early sign. Difficulty concentrating, or huge increase in procrastination because you only want to think about something else, or you're thinking only about the present worry, which will escalate, as I said, into difficulty sleeping, intestinal tract problems, difficulty controlling worry, having the urge to avoid things that trigger anxiety. You can see that these are not in a continuum of intensity, and that graduate school will elicit some of these just because it's of the nature of the game. But I think perhaps people don't take it as seriously as they might, because they look around and everybody's a little anxious, restless, or having trouble sleeping, and so they think it's not a big deal. So know yourself enough to know that if these things are escalating, take them seriously, and then yeah, get some help. Tell other people. Now, the Mayo Clinic advises that if your worries don't go away on their own, or if they get worse over time, seek help. And if there's medication that's part of the continuum for anxiety, you might want to look for the non-medical interventions first. Sometimes going to church, being part of a student group, attending a clinic on anxiety can give you some behavioral things that can help before you get to a point where you want to go into medication, because medications can affect both your sense of self and your neurocognitive brain functions. And we'll see more about that with the student who talks about her experience. So graduate school may cause this. You're very smart to be here today, even if you're not experiencing the anxiety. perhaps one of the things all of us can do is just to help students know that what it looks like, and be ready for it. Think for a moment, what am I going to do if I start to exhibit? How do I feel about it? And I gave you a link to Derek Lowe's experiences about anxiety. He had, he was right up to the last minute. He was so anxious about something. He went into the lab. He completely had a major meltdown in the lab, which actually turned out to be a good thing, because when he went back in the next day to clean up his mess, it was horrendous. For some reason, that got him over it, and he was able to move on. Acknowledging the reality of it helps us adjust our mindset. And there are two extremes. On one end, there's the people who just think they can power through, eat stress for breakfast. I've heard I eat stress like it's a power bar. Sounds good, isn't so good for us. And on the other hand, some people feel victimized, and they get smaller and smaller. And we'll talk about imposter syndrome a little later. So this is not something you can, of which you are in complete control. We have within us the possibility of, just like people can get addicted to substances, our neuro systems can fall into a pattern that it becomes very, very hard to get out of. So treat yourself like you would treat a child that was ill, and don't beat up on yourself more, and do as you would tell a child, get help, take good care of yourself, don't give up on eating, and just take good care of yourself. And then if you have too much on your plate and that's causing anxiety, then you have to develop a way of saying, should I do this other thing? What are the consequences of not doing A, B, or C? Which one is the one I can let go of, because I have to let go of something? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next session with work-life balance. Now, those are all the what you do if kind of ways of looking at things. Anytime we take on a problem, and you may have seen one of the slides I use a lot where the woman has a red bandana pulling her back, and she has another red bandana pulling her forward. There is always within moving forward the pattern that at some point we have stretched to the max we are comfortable with, and then we feel like our own inertia pulls us back. So our motivation is what pulls us forward. Always good to reconnect with that. Why are you here? What is are you doing this because it will get you and your family ahead? Are you doing this because you're passionate about your topic? What were the ideas you had when you entered graduate school? And then how do those ideas play out in your ideal future? You might want to picture that future. You might want to put pictures on the wall. You might want to put up words. Part of my future when I was getting my doctorate was moving to Ireland, and I had pictures of the house and of Ireland as my screensaver. People would come into my office and they'd stop talking because they had this screensaver come up. And then, so it was good for a number of reasons. It not only encouraged me, but it helped the people around me see that why I was doing what I was doing. All of these things help keep us engaged. Give these, take a little time out and give yourself the visual cues you need to keep motivated. If that means, another thing you can do there too is you can join a group where everybody can communicate about what you're motivated to talk about. We may not have a lot of people in our lives. Like, I love to go to Council of Graduate Schools meetings because I get to talk about graduate schools. There's not a lot of people in small town in Ireland that can talk about what it's like to be a graduate student, or let alone a dean or a vice provost running a graduate school. And then finally, however, and this is probably true of everything we talk about when we talk about professional development, figure out what it amounts to and then have a plan. So this one talks about time management, but time management doesn't just layer on another layer of things we have to do. If it's done well, we feel like it relieves stress. And again, I'll mention this in the session on work-life balance, but there's a tool called Kanban Flow that was actually recommended by Adrian, who comes to our meetings a lot, and it has within it a Pomodoro timer. So when it's a particularly hard day in the office at Dr. Alnett, I keep myself timed. And that relieves stress because I only have to do this task for that 45 minutes. I know I'm going to take a break, whatever, and it keeps my mind at a more even keel. And then, as they say at the bottom, stress doesn't occur in a vacuum, and it's not always bad. It can help your end game. But we want to not be anxiety. So stress is manageable. Anxiety may not be. Now, these are pieces of advice from a graduate student who dealt with deep anxiety and mental illness during graduate school. So some 5 pieces of advice that are simple and direct. First thing she says is to limit the things that are difficult. So if it's difficult to write, if it's difficult to do research, whatever it is in your graduate work that's difficult, don't also take on in your home life and every other part of your life things that are difficult. Keep the difficulty to focused ability. Remember that you can't do everything. And you certainly don't have to be perfect at everything. And so for some people, taking on a graduate student advisorship, or taking on working with younger students, or being part of the student government, while it might look good on your CV, isn't worth what it might do to the rest of your mental health. Rely on other people. This is a time when we're not feeling strong, it just feels good to have people who care around us. Whether they're professors, they're friends, you go to a therapist, whoever it is, you need people in your life who care about you, who are willing to support you through the fact that you want this graduate degree, who are smart, who have ideas, and who can give you something to play off of as you guide your own ship. Because you're not a victim. This is your ship, and it ran into some rough waters, but you can get yourself through it. Of course, as I've said, and will continue to say, self-care is essential. What self-care looks like to you is very individual to you. It might be as simple as regularly stopping and cooking your own food and really taking attention. For this author, who was a graduate student, it meant sometimes reading Harry Potter instead of a scholarly journal, going to a movie, hanging out with friends. And then she brings up medications, and I thought, I'll just read this. If you decide to try medication, remember that antidepressants can take 4 or more weeks to work effectively. So it's not I'm going to get this and feel better always. And sometimes the first med you try will not work or will have unbearable side effects. So if you're a student, have a friend or family member look out for you when you start a new med in case they see and you have adverse side effects. Wait until break from graduate school to try a new med if possible. At the very least, don't start your med the same week your big term paper or grant application is due. So with that, I'll ask if people in the room have comments or questions before we move on to imposter syndrome. Raise your hand if you are typing something. Okay. I'm not seeing any hands going up. So we'll go on to imposter syndrome. The next segment is imposter syndrome, and for that, we're looking at some social science research. But before we start, the control issues that come with imposter syndrome come and go, pervasive or in bouts. Oh, and Erica added that therapy is great for anxiety. And my friend who has anxiety is going through, is it CBT? Which is a 12 session, for her at least 12 sessions, very focused. And she's had very good effect. So things to look into. Thanks for mentioning it, Erica. Cognitive-based therapy. Thank you, Adrian. So overarching control issues with imposter syndrome, pervasive, or it can be in bouts. So you can feel all the time or just sometimes. It amounts to an impassioned negative internal dialogue. We all have potential for internal dialogue sometimes. This one, though, chips away at your self-esteem or doesn't allow it to flourish because at the deepest level, you feel like a phony. Like you really aren't the good thing that other people think you are. And it can be a dance between you're motivated by people thinking you're not so good, so you go. I've had many PhD students tell me that they were driven to get their PhD because other people thought they were stupid and they wanted to prove them wrong. At the same time, that same kind of idea can have absorbed some of that talk, and that's these inner conversations amount to imposter syndrome. Wikipedia defines it as also known as imposter phenomena, impostorism, fraud syndrome, or the imposter experience is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Today's conversation is the work of Dr. Valerie Young. She's divided these issues into 5 types. And Adrian, you'll have your answer in just a second because she's made it one of her types. And I'm giving you her links. So the first type she sees is the perfectionist. And the perfectionist and imposter syndrome often go hand in hand. These people would set very high goals for themselves, and then when they fail to reach the goal, they experience self-doubt, worry, etc. And then that internalized might be that they're never satisfied. She has these sections when she says, not sure if this applies to you. So these are her questions for, are you a perfectionist? Have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Do you have great difficulty delegating? Even when you're able to do so, do you feel frustrated and disappointed in the results from other people? When you miss the insanely high mark on something, do you accuse yourself of not being cut out for your job or ruminate it on for days? And do you feel like your work must be 100% perfect 100% of the time? So if you have a tendency to say yes to those, you might look more into what she is saying about perfectionism. Let me get you her name again, Dr. Valerie Young. And Patrice mentions that Michelle Bryan at the University of South Carolina also does research on imposter syndrome with a particular emphasis on women of color and in leadership. Thank you very much, Patrice, for that. So we have another resource to go check out, as well as Dr. Young. For this particular type, success is not going to be satisfying. They're either, oh, I didn't really do all that well, or I could have done better. And so a step in this is to realize that those thoughts aren't productive, nor are they healthy, and to begin to learn how to celebrate achievement and just be in your own skin and know that the ups and downs happen and celebrate the ups. Another outcome, a positive step forward, will be when you learn to take your mistakes in stride, viewing them as a natural part of a learning process. Push yourself, but scaffold it. Don't push yourself beyond what you're ready for. Don't force yourself to start or to actually take steps on the project you've been planning. Don't just say to yourself, oh, it has to be perfect before I can do it. But literally be willing to be a learner. If we get into Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset, be willing to be a learner and just take one step at a time. So a second type in Dr. Young's work is the superwoman or man. So considering that the inner world of these people is that they are phonies, working in a world where everybody else is more real than they are, then they can put on a false, like the suit that superheroes put on that makes them the superhero. They can put on a front, what feels like a front to them, that they are very good at what they do. And so these would be people who would not easily say, oh, I blew it, I could have, or pass it, delegate it to someone else, or, just the kind of easy things that we get with ourselves when we sit comfortably in our own skin. But they're always trying to be better, bigger, save the day. So if you're not sure if this applies to you, questions. Do you stay at the office later than the rest of your team, or work harder, be in the library more than any other graduate student you know, or in the lab more than any other graduate student you know, even past the point when you've completed the day's necessary work? Oh, you just want to get this one more thing perfect. Do you get stressed when you're not working and find downtime wasteful? So rather than be able to sit back and relax, you're looking for more things to do. Have you left your hobbies and passions fall by the wayside, sacrificed to work? Now, I have to say that graduate students frequently find that they can't pursue hobbies and passions very much during the time that they're in graduate school. So if you answer yes to that last one, but no to the first two, I wouldn't be overly concerned. Just be aware that sometimes it is nice to do something just for the fun of doing it. Do you feel like you haven't truly earned your title, or that you're where you are by mistake? I remember my very first student orientation at Teachers College. The vice provost came out, or vice president came out and said, I just want all of you to know that no, it's not a mistake that you're here. And now I look back on that and I think that without being aware, he maybe was signaling the fact that imposter syndrome runs rampant. Imposter workaholics are actually addicted to the validation that comes from working, not to the work itself. So I get kudos because I put 80 hours in last week, regardless of whether I like what I'm doing or not. So this is a matter of external and internal validation. We need to guide our own ships from an internal point, not from an external point. And this Superwoman, Superman syndrome has difficulty with criticism as much as they have difficulty with approval. So watch for that. And then as you become more in tune to the internal validation, that helps us nurture our own inner confidence. And one of the things we'll do in the next section is we'll talk about apps. But it really just amounts to it, whether we do it with a research journal or we do it with an application. If we just keep track of our thoughts, we are more in an internally focused fashion than if we don't. That's the power in journaling. The natural genius is another one of her types. I just have to be, somebody somewhere along the line said I was just really good at this. I'm just a natural at this. And now no matter what I do, I have to live up to that. Similar to perfectionism, isn't it? It's also what Carol Dweck, I think, would call a fixed mindset. And so we can see where different social scientists have unpacked similar ideas and put them in different ways. But these are her questions. Are you used to excelling without too much effort? Do you have a track record of getting straight A's or gold stars? Were you told frequently that you were the smart one? Do you dislike the idea of having a mentor because you have to handle things on your own, or you don't really trust that anybody can do it better than you? When you're faced with a setback, does your confidence tumble and then you have to really rebuild it? You have feelings of shame about not doing everything well. And do you avoid challenges because it's so uncomfortable to try something that you're not good at? Again, very similar to Dweck's fixed mindset. To move past this, see yourself as a work in progress. And that's the learning mindset. Accomplish great things one step at a time. She's also got a type called the soloist. Sufferers feel as though asking for help reveals their phoniness. And it's okay to be independent, but not to the extent you refuse assistance from others. And this can be something that is set up from how our families treated us. And what in my family, we were encouraged to be independent, and I had to train myself to say yes when people offered to help. And then if you're not sure if it applies, do you firmly feel that you need to accomplish things on your own? I don't need anyone help. Does that sound like something you would say? Do you frame requests in terms of the requirements of the project rather than as your needs of the person? So I need help on this project rather than I need help because I have too much on my plate right now. And then finally, and you can see, of course, these overlap, the experts measure competence based on what and how much they know rather than who they are as a person and how they feel about themselves. Believing that they will never know enough, they fear being exposed as. So if you feel like, oh no, I better not say anything or other people will know that I am just making it up, that is an indication of what she calls the expert. Her questions: do you shy away from applying to a job or to going the next step in graduate school unless you meet every single requirement? Are you constantly seeking out trainings and certifications, going to one more webinar even though you really know the things? The topics? If you've been in a role for some time, do you still feel like you don't know enough? And can you even hear somebody say you're an expert in your field? This is very important if you are going towards a PhD or other kind of doctorate degree and you're getting close to the finish line. Because when you come to your final defense and viva, one of the things that people will be looking for is whether or not you can be the acknowledged expert on your topic at that time. So you want to be able to be comfortable with your own expertise. So sure, there's always more to learn. But if we build our platform on all that we have done before, and it's a good amount, we have things that we can share. And consider it a form of procrastination to never step them out, to be not willing to go to the conference, to be not willing to step up in front of a group and do a 3-minute thesis. Those are actually a form of procrastination that may come from this type of challenge. So practice just-in-time learning. At this moment, this is what I understand. Realize there's no shame when you need to ask for help. And we have more resources showing up for those that are watching by recording. There were slides in the room. I believe they're available to you after the session if you go into Big Marker, or you can email Margie at drlnet.com and she will send them on to you. And we are told that Parman A 2016, the imposter phenomenon in higher education, incidence and impact. It was published in the Journal of Education Theory and Practice, 16, volume 1, pages 51 to 60. And Patricia, very good. Obviously something you've studied. Verkoyen, Verkoyens, 2017, Overcoming the Imposter Phenomenon in the Classroom. That was published in Teaching and Innovation Project, 7-1 and pages 1 through 11. Thank you very much for the extra resources. Anybody else in the room have a question or comment about imposter syndrome? I would like a discussion at the end whether or not you find the breaking of it into types useful. It was the first time I had seen that research, and I wasn't sure whether it's sometimes more useful to have things clustered in a whole or to have them divided into types. So that's something I'll ask when we come to the end. Anything else? Raise your hand if you have a comment and you're typing away. Yash asks me, what are my thoughts on self-efficacy versus anxiety? I was trained to, and as anxiety is one part of self-esteem or efficacy. Yash, I was trained to look at things in terms of external or internal locus of control. And anxiety, I see as a hypertension that has that internal external locus of control thing a little out of order. We're worried about something externally to us. Self-esteem being than internal locus of control that is giving us a good solid base. So those are my thoughts, is that there's something there when we put it on the other spectrum that seems to me worthy of looking at. Now, can we use anxiety? And I don't know if anxiety is the right word. To me, anxiety is like at the edge of the spectrum, and we really ought to do something about it. But can we use tension as a motivator? Absolutely. Sometimes motivation comes from wanting to do better, and sometimes motivation comes from trying to get away from what we feel is a negative force. And so when we feel tension, or we worry about something, and then that propels us to take action sooner to get past it, then those are stepping stones to greater self-esteem and efficacy. So these either are not either or energies. It really has to do, again, I think, from our internal focus and how am I doing? Am I satisfied with my life right now? I might be a stressed out maniac to my friends, and I might need to say to them, I'm really sorry I'm a stressed out maniac right now, but I'm going through something. But I might be there by choice, and it might be okay with me that I'm a stressed out maniac for a short period of time. But when I'm got it turned in on myself like almost a cancerous thing, then I need to practice greater self-care. And that leads us into this other conversation, which is the things that cause the almost similar tensions and slowdowns and challenges, but they are not necessarily at all within our control. And I'm going to take us now into the realm of either being sick or having to take care of someone who is sick. And the challenge to our control here is that it's episodic. So a sick person is not equally sick every day, nor is the person you're taking care of equally sick every day. So I have some friends who are taking care of an ill parent. Every year, at the end of the year, beginning of the next year, this parent has bad episodes. And then spring will come along, and likely it'll get better, because in other years it has gotten better. That may be true for us. It may be true I have other friends who are dealing with fibromyalgia. For no particular good reason that they can see, they may just have a really bad week where everything hurts so bad they can't get out of bed. Or the big diseases. You may have episodes based upon the treatment that you're taking that has you down, and then it gets better. So it's hard to live a life where episodes come and go and you really don't have any control. You don't have control over how you feel, or whether you can get out of bed, or any of your time. And that engenders hopeless, helpless victim responses. So we have to watch out for how we respond to lack of external controls. If we're taking care of someone else or ourselves, we may be just resent the whole situation, or we may become depressed by it, may create a complete identity crisis. I thought I was better, stronger, kinder, nicer, more resilient than this. All not useful thoughts. And these entail both emotional and physical strain, including monitoring medications, insurance hassles, outside stuff, transportation hassles, medical appointment, time caring, just preparing meals, lack of sleep, constantly worrying about outcome. So a really tough set of situations. And at this point, I have to say, do graduate students graduate instead of all of these things, in spite of all these things going on? Yes, every day. Do other graduate students decide that they need to take a timeout until these are gone? Yes, every day. And so, again, all people have to guide their own ship. The conversation in the background continues to tease out anxiety, which I think is, and Adrian, precisely so. She said, I suppose there's more to anxiety than just being nervous. Anxiety could go as a subconscious and then be impossible to shut off by conscious efforts. And that actually, I think, is endemic in the way it's defined, is that anxiety is when your conscious efforts don't turn off the tensions. It's worry and perhaps another level on the same continuum when your conscious efforts, in fact, do work pretty well. But that doesn't mean that you can go steps down any of these continuums and then take some efforts and the steps will go back. To some extent, everything we're talking about today is episodic. Okay, so these are suggestions from an academic who was a sole caretaker for an 82-year-old father who had Alzheimer's, dementia, and schizophrenia. So do some practical things. Get all your records together on a good day when you have a little bit of time. Get the records together, store them in a file cabinet, organize them. You're going to need to be able to have a lot of information to keep track of. Later on, you're going to want to have accessible records. So when you start being involved in one of these things, think about record keeping. It might be the last thing on your mind. Make a daily, weekly, monthly schedule and use it to help you stay strong. Routines help us feel strong and mitigate our anxiety in the middle of really chaotic times. Quickly seek out any appropriate community organizations or support groups. And learn from others what external care might be possible through different providers. Every location where we are has things that go on that help people who are faced with illness, your own or others. See what's available and take advantage. If you can have, if finances are part of it and you're taking care of someone, talk to accountants and tax people about whether that older person or other person can be a dependent, whether you can have some relief from taxes as a result. Talk to financial planners if this is going to be a long-term thing. Don't let finances just take you over and then everybody is facing a much worse situation. If there's a lot of people involved, if you're taking care of a family member, then you might want to go to family lawyer and look at the official documents, who's going to have the power of attorney, who's going to have the medical power of attorney, and get those things in place earlier rather than later. You might feel like, oh, you're condemning. This is my friend. She says, oh, I don't really want to go there because I don't want to feel like I'm writing my father off. On the other hand, it's a task. Get it done when you have the strength to do it. It doesn't have to ever be invoked, but you will sleep more with less worry if you do take care of these things when you have strength. And see if anyone who is ill can have an outside person they can talk to, because they might say things to a professional social worker that they wouldn't say to a family member. And then that person can work with the family to help navigate the systems. And I'll come back to the current conversation in the as we finish these up, and then we'll use what's being said now as stepping stones for the discussion. So finishing up with this, Talk to friends and colleagues. That's true of all of these. Hold yourself to yourself. So you have certain obligations. Do them. Otherwise you can't let your life slide to give it to someone else. That's not a successful way. But do tell your friends and family members that you have these extra burdens in your life. Perhaps there's ways you don't have to actually come into campus. You can participate in meetings via Skype. You can get notes from a lecture that you miss. You can talk to your professors to work out other things that you can do. And as you're looking at your own research, consider whether or not it's completely doable given these new challenges that you're facing. Have conversations with your advisor about some either a length of time difference or setting up how the data were gathered differently, or see what flexibilities there are. Write when you can't work. I had one student who wrote her final dissertation when her father was in the hospital with cancer. Every time he had an operation or was in ICU, she was out in the waiting room working. She said it was the only thing that kept her sane. And then over and over and over again, we've said this on each one of these, we have to take care of ourselves. Graduate school is demanding. You also may have demanding family lives. You may have demanding work life as well. And that's why we're doing the next group, which is work-life balance. So this is a multi-layered look today at a deep thing. So I thought of a discussion that was this helpful. In your life, who else should you be talking to that you're not? And then there is another group coming up in another at a quarter of. But we have 7 minutes here, and I'm looking at the discussion. So anxiety, this is interesting. One of our people said, I can be doing menial, mindless tasks and then begin to feel my heart pound. Do not have a history of mental illness, but my anxiety is now always lurking in the background and oddly comes to the surface when I am not experiencing a particularly stressful event. And my friend experienced some of that. It's almost like stressful events caught her focus and she had to cope with them, so she did. But non-stressful things allowed this underlying tension to come to the of surface. And the first step in self-care for her was telling people who cared about her she had to cancel a Christmas trip, and that let the people in her life take a heads up that there was much more going on than we thought. And lots of us are consciously there. And then she went into therapy and is having CBT, and it's working. So we cannot afford to lose the whole ship because we don't take care of the hole in the hull. Another person says, I struggle with anxiety. It tends to experience excessive worrying, too active brain, which may cause me to wake up in the middle of the night or to prevent restful sleep. Reduce screen time before bed? Yes. Have intentional reading for pleasure before bed? Yes. They would also, for both of those other things, people would say is meditation, calming the brain, getting the breath work, relaxing muscles, taking warm baths before bed, absolutely stopping anything that has to do with electronics. Another comment, struggling with imposter syndrome phenomenon, which is why there's some been some good resources added. And it is a work in progress, probably to some extent for everyone, to affirm the fact that we are smart enough and intelligent enough. And one of the things that I learned was that I am never the brightest bulb and I'm never the dullest in any, whether it's a physical going outside to do a race. There's always going to be somebody in worse shape than I am. There's always going to be people quicker on the uptake than I am. There's always going to be people that are struggling more than I am. It's just the fact that humanity is a continuum, and we might struggle today and we might be to the medium tomorrow, and we might be in a different group and actually be the one at the top on another day. This is just part of being human. Sustaining the fight flight is damaging. Yes, having adrenaline running in your body is damaging. It's damaging, especially all the time. It's damaging to our cells and to our digestion and to our ability to sleep, which damages everything. Yeah, adrenaline is not our friend unless we are facing a big situation, immediate situation, and we need to get out of it. So managing that. And again, we'll talk, Erica has mentioned some calming brain things. Remind yourself you are amazing. We all are amazing. The fact that we are more alike than we are different, the fact that we have curiosity and are willing to put our time and our activity behind it to do research that will help the world. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique is a way to help us relax. Erica, is that what you were referring to with that? And then we get into the conversation about graduate work, chair, advisor work. And this is an interesting comment. This was discussed at the meeting I was just at. In an ideal world, you would all have advisors who were caring and who you could go to, and they would help you through these challenges. But the reality is that for many people in graduate school, the advisor relationship is a power differential that has to be managed. And you don't want to look like you are weak in that particular level of situation. It might put you in danger of losing your ground, your TA ships, or other things that are important to you. But that doesn't mean there aren't other people out there. And that doesn't mean they can't help you. So don't stop looking just because of that. Now, the comment in the room is that if there is a chair, the chair advisings, we all hear about those relationships that might be demanding, harassing, abusive versus supportive and mentoring. When it gets to the abusive level, don't let it go. It is not, no university, absolutely no university wants to have you as a graduate student in an abusive relationship with someone who is employed by that university. You do have to find the right people to help you navigate that. But your graduate school office might be a place to start. Your mental health facilities might be a place to start too. When abuse is going on, it must stop. We are past that as educators, and as the academic world is moving past that. Used to be much more prevalent. We used to say that's just the way it is. I don't know one leader now who would say that kind of thing. And there are going to be places at your university where students can get help and mediation can go on. So don't let yourself be abused. Wow. please raise your hand if today's conversation was helpful to you. A few people. If today's conversation might not have been as helpful as you wanted, I would really appreciate it if you would type in questions or ideas. It's an important topic, and we don't mind doing it again with a different lens. So what could we have covered that you would have found more provocative, or what questions do you have left? And we'll take them down and we'll use them as the focus the next time this conversation comes up. So raise your hand if you're typing. I'm here to hang out. It's 1:30, so officially the webinar is over. If you want to say goodbye and move on, and if you're interested in the work-life balance, which is just a tiny bit of conversation from me and a lot of conversation from students, then you'll have to leave this webinar room and go into the work-life balance. Yes, Adrian, it does. It was meant to exactly that. It was meant to be the tip of a gigantic iceberg. It's meant to say, if you're on this iceberg, just know that we know it's a gigantic iceberg. But if there are people on the iceberg who think that there is one particular thing that would help it next time, please let me know. And we'll do it that way, because we don't always want to just be the tip of the iceberg, folks. Or if you have people at your universities who are really good at this, let me know. We are just now beginning to reach out to university personnel to stipend them if they are interested in doing webinars for us in the future. So I will take those names and universities and pass them on if you know of people you recommend. And if not, I hope it was good. I hope if someone asks you, how are you doing? I hope your response can be good enough and well enough. And my graduate work is hard, but I'm coping and it's going forward. Thank you, Erica. More on ways to deal. So that'll take me into the realm of some mental health professionals, which is good. Thank you for that suggestion. Any other suggestions, folks? Okay. Ways to deal. So this was a what is it? How do I know? Next time will be techniques. You know, the when will you graduate question. Managing family and helping them understand that their concerns actually only add to your stress, really worthy of discussion. And it comes up over and over again, especially when you're going into final defense or viva. They don't understand that you'll have more work to do afterwards sometimes, especially depending on where you are in the world and how those processes work at your university. So the best you can do for them is to keep them informed, and to help you probably are facing things you didn't know. You probably thought when you started you were going to be done in a certain length of time, and now you understand why you can't always do that. So help them understand your learning curve. That might help manage their outside expectations. Adriana, I hope that's a helpful suggestion. If you are the first one to graduate with an advanced degree, then telling stories of what it's like in grad school, what you see in other people, will help them understand. An analogy that might help is that not everybody has to be a mountain climber. But if you are going to be a mountain climber, you will learn as you go that the more difficult the mountain, the more you have to have the right tools, the more things get slowed down, etc. You might find an analogy like that they can relate to, or being really good at a sport or something like that, and then use that analogy to help you understand that when an athlete starts an athletic professional career, they don't always understand when or know when they're going to get to a certain level. They have to just keep working at it. So maybe that's good. Okay, everyone. I hope this was useful to you. I'm going to close the webinar now, and I'll be back in a little less than 10 minutes.